So after 100 years of mediumship research, we can confidently say that that there is such a thing as what we call anomalous information reception, or AIR. So AIR is the phenomenon that certain mediums can report accurate and specific information about the deceased without any prior knowledge about the deceased, who we call a discarnate. Dis means not, and carn means flesh, so not in the flesh. So without any previous information about the deceased, the discarnate, or the living person who wants to talk to the discarnate, we call that person the sitter. So they can report information without any prior information about the sitter or the discarnate, without using fraud or deception, and without any feedback during the reading. So we can say they're reporting this information, and from where it comes is anomalous. So why should we research mediumship today if we've been doing it for 100 years? Well, the medium's processes are much different today. The historical research often included trance mediums who went into trance during the reading, and they took on they allowed the discarnate to take possession of their body and use their voice and whatnot to get the message across. And they didn't have any conscious experience of the reading as it took place. They were unconscious, and the dead person spoke through them. And the mediums we work with, and I think you could say the majority of mediums in the world today are mental mediums, not trance mediums. So they remain awake and aware. We're also able to use more sophisticated and rigorous methods today than 100 years ago. And the results of mediumship research have important scientific and social implications. I'm going to do this. Or not. Thank you. And so some of these important scientific and social implications are this question we've been talking about all morning, that the relationship between the mind and consciousness and the brain, does mind live in the brain, or does the brain just serve as a receiver for mind? Mediums might be able to perform socially useful tasks like finding missing persons and solving crimes, but we need to understand what they do and how they do it better before we can use that ubiquitously in society. The dead might have wisdom that we don't have access to that can help us solve problems in the world today. The results of scientific evidence for life after death may be helpful in hospice. So, some people, when faced at the end with their own mortality, are comforted by religion, but I'm going to be comforted by science. And I assume that there are other people in the world like that. And so this idea that science can say something about whether or not there's life after death may help people during their transition and as well as their families. The evidence for life after death may have a huge impact on allopathic health care. Right now, I think it's safe to say physicians view death as a failure, that something has gone wrong, whereas it's only natural. I spoke at a hospice in San Diego recently, and I heard one of the grief counselors said the phrase that she uses is, "None of us make it out of here alive." So it's an inevitable fact that we need to take into account, and I'm continually appalled by the fact that we train the hell out of our mothers on what birth is going to be like and how to give birth, so everybody's happy and comfortable, but we don't have that same training for dying. And I heard a story recently about someone was in hospice, and he had trained he was Buddhist, and he had trained in the way that Buddhists view the death process. And the nurses kept coming in and turning the TV on in his room, and he kept turning it off, like, I just need to meditate. And they couldn't foresee why he would want to be alone with his thoughts when he was dying, that he clearly would want to watch Survivor or whatever. No pun intended. So we can make that a lot easier for people who are dying, and I think that would make it easier for the people they loved, they were leaving behind too. And the big one is mediumship readings may be helpful in grief counseling. And I'll talk at length about that a little later. So how do we bring mediums into the lab? Colored liquid in a test tube is the international symbol for in the lab. Though I worked in a lot of labs and I've never seen green or blue liquid in a lab. But so how do we bring mediums into the lab? I joke, how do we get them out from behind their crystal ball and into the lab? But the truth is, no one that we work with uses a crystal ball. They're very, they're everyday average people. And if you saw them in the grocery store, you would never know that they were mediums. They're just regular people who happen to be able to communicate efficiently with the dead. So, and we'll hear, Dave is there in the picture. So we'll hear from Dave a little bit later today. So we study mediums through 3 methods at Windbridge: proof-focused research, process-focused research, and applied research. And I'll go through each of those. But first I'll get a drink. Okay, so the first topic I'm going to talk about is proof-focused research. And so that's research that's just interested in showing either proof for or against whether mediums can do what they say they're doing. So can they report accurate information about the deceased? And historically, the vast majority of research on mediums has been proof-focused. So to do proof-focused research in the laboratory, you need to include 2 equally important factors. So the first is an optimal research environment. So a research setup that optimizes the process for everyone involved: the medium, the sitter, the hypothesized discarnate. And I use a sports metaphor, and I like to say, you can't study football on a basketball court using baseball players and the rules for hockey and then say you've disproven the existence of football. You have to study football using trained football players on a football field using the rules for football, then you can study football. So when we get ahead of ourselves and we're trying to design experiments, we say, okay, well, what if we put the medium underwater? And then, no, it's not football anymore then. So you have to study, you have to use the environment that the phenomenon happens in nature. So we do readings on the phone, which most mediums are comfortable with, and we just do 1 reading a day. We don't make mediums do 100 readings in rapid fire, and so we optimize the process in order to optimize the ability to see something if it exists. And the second factor is maximum experimental controls. So you want to make sure that you've eliminated all normal explanations for any positive results that you get. Okay, so there are these 6 different aspects of the methods that we use: screening, pairing, reading, formatting, scoring, and blinding. And I didn't get my visual aid out. If you are a member of IONS, you may have received this issue of Shift, and there's an article that I wrote in here about some of these methods. There's a couple mistakes. So I've also written about it extensively in mind-numbing detail in this Journal of Parapsychology issue, if anyone's interested in flipping through that, in this article called Contemporary Methods Used in Laboratory-Based Mediumship Research. So I'm going to go through each of those just briefly, but there's 30 pages in this journal you're happy to look at if you'd like. It is available for download on the Windbridge website. That's a very good question. So the first one I'll talk about is screening. So we screen all the people involved, the sitters, the mediums, and as well as we can, the discarnate. So our sitters are all volunteers. They're at least 25 years old, and they've been grieving for at least 1 year. We feel that within a year, you should just worry about your grief and not be part of such controlled, micromanaged scientific experiments. You should just deal with your grief and not be a guinea pig. We also ask sitters about their belief systems because we don't want it wouldn't optimize the environment if we use people who didn't even entertain the possibility that mediums were real. That's not football anymore. We also asked people about their any experience of after-death communication, or ADCs. And the one we hear most often is people have experienced communication with their discarnate in the dream state. And so then we have a little bit of evidence that that discarnate is motivated to communicate with that sitter. We also asked them about their knowledge of the nature of their relationship with the discarnate, because the sitter needs to know the discarnate's life relatively well in order to be able to score the information that the medium provides. We also ask if they know other deceased people who may, based on their personalities when they were alive, may have the impetus to interrupt our reading, because we do one discarnate readings, which I'll talk about a little later. So, we've had people, and they're like, oh, I want to talk to my father. And we ask that question, do you know of anyone else who would interrupt that reading? They go, well, my mom was always talking over him, so I assume she would want to come in. So we're like, well, we can't do that. If there's a risk that someone else we might get drop-ins that we didn't intend to have, then we try to stay away from that. And the sitters also need to be computer proficient, because that's how all the training and the scoring takes place, is over email. And then we do an extensive screening of our mediums. So at the end of the screening, they're called Windbridge Certified Research Mediums, or we pronounce it WCRMs. We thought about Windbridge Research Mediums, but then they would be worms, and we didn't think that they would like that. So it's WCRMs. And I do not hesitate to say that our group of certified mediums are the best mediums in the world. They've gone through this extensive testing and training. So they first fill out a questionnaire. They take some personality and psychological tests. They are interviewed by at least one existing certified medium. Then I interview them, and then they do 2 blinded telephone readings, of each of which there are 2 parts. So it's 4 different readings, basically. And then if they pass the step 5 test readings, then they go on to the training. So they're trained in a little bit of the history of mediumship research and the things that we're concerned with today in mediumship research. They're also trained in human subjects research, because they themselves are human subjects, and the sitters that they interact with are also research subjects. And then the last step, they're trained in grief, because all the people that they deal with are grieving in some manner or another. And a list of the Windbridge certified research mediums are available on our website, and all the information that links out to their personal websites on there. So you can find that on our website. So I wanted to just talk about some data from the Step 2 personality test. So so far we've collected results from 27 claimant mediums. So some of these mediums have been screened and passed, and a couple have been screened and failed. So this 27 are just people who claim to be mediums. We give them what's called the Tellegen Absorption Scale, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, and the Neo-Personality Inventory. And I'm just going to talk about the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator today. So how many people here have taken the Myers-Briggs? Yeah, so everyone's familiar with we can go around and say what our letters are. So it's based on Jung's psychological types. There's 4 dichotomies: extroversion, introversion, sensing, intuition, thinking, feeling, and judging and perceiving. And so you can be one of 16 personality types based on those dichotomies. So of those 27 mediums, this is what we found. The mediums were about an even split between extroversion and introversion. So that doesn't seem to play into talent as a medium. And the same thing, it's almost even with judging and perceiving. But 93% of mediums were N for intuitive, and 93% were F for feeling. And so if you look at the national distribution, it's much different. So extroversion, introversion, again, is even. Judging, perceiving, almost even. Only 27% of the population is intuitive, according to Myers-Briggs. and 60% are feeling, but we're at 93 with the mediums. So clearly there's something there. And 85% of the mediums are both N and F. So some mediums were N and T, and some were S and F. But 85% were both N and F. In the total population, only 16% of people are both N and F. 13% of men and 19% of women. And when you take the Myers-Briggs, if you have it sent in and scored electronically, they have a thing you can fill out with your profession, and they collect all of that data. So the profession with the highest percentage of people who are N and F are clergy at 55%, and followed closely by art, drama, and music teachers at 54%. Mediums, again, 85%. The lowest profession with the lowest amount of NF are police and detectives, which is maybe why they don't get along with mediums so well. And so while we're talking about what kind of people mediums are, I just wanted to talk about some misconceptions about mediums. The first is that all mediums are kind, spiritual people. That's not true. All the Windbridge certified research mediums are kind, spiritual people. But not everyone whose brain can do this, that does not necessitate that they are kind. So just keep that in mind when you're dealing with a medium out in the world, because you're grieving and you're looking to this person to help facilitate your grief recovery, and they can actually do more harm than good. Another misconception is an in-person reading is better than a phone reading. I believe the opposite is true. All of our test readings and our experimental readings that we do at Windbridge are all phone. I've never even been in the same room as most of our mediums. And I've heard, I'll let Dave talk about this later, but a number of mediums have said that they prefer a phone reading than over an in-person reading for a number of reasons. One, they can do it in their pajamas. They don't have to, have office space or let you into their home and make sure that they dust it and that sort of thing, that they can just be on the phone in their best comfort. And another issue is, I say they don't call them sensitives for nothing. They're empathetic people. And to watch you right in front of them at the height of your grief and so missing the discarnate that you want to talk to, that's distracting to them, because they, I think a lot of times, just want to give you a hug. And so if you're just on the phone, they can kind of block you out and just listen to the discarnate. Another thing, and this is important just as an evidence-based thing, if they can't see you, that's a whole class of information they don't have about you now, and that they can't use, if you're worried about a medium being fraudulent, that they can't use to falsify an accurate reading. But on the other side, that then it doesn't let their left brain get in the way. So if they can see you, their brain is trying to make assessments about you, as a brain is apt to do. That's its job. But if you're just on the phone, again, they can block you out and just stay in their right brain, basically. And the last one I want to talk about, misconception, was more money means more or better info. That's not true either. Just a way to think about this is, all the mediums that you see on TV, like one day they were not famous, and then the next day they were famous, and they're probably no better medium from one day to the next, but now they can charge 10, 20, 30 times as much as they could. So just because it costs more doesn't mean it's a better medium. The medium at the free psychic fair may be just as good as anyone you've seen on TV. Okay, so that was screening, and now I'm going to talk about pairing, reading, and formatting. So historically, they often would have a medium just read 5 people, and then without the people hearing it in a blinded situation. And then they give those 5 people those 5 readings, and they would say rank them as to which one you think is yours, in order of how well they apply to your deceased person. But if you got all people who were, that looked the same and had the same hobbies and, they were all grandmotherly plump figures who liked to sew and bake, like how could you tell which reading was yours? So what we do is we specifically pair deceased people to be the most opposite. So they're the same gender, so there aren't gender-based clues in the reading, but they're disparate in age, physical description, personality description, hobbies, cause of death, so that that optimizes the scoring process for the sitter, that optimizes their ability to tell the difference between the two. And I was on a plane recently, and the gentleman next to me made the mistake of asking me what I did for a living, and we spent the next hour. He was a psychologist, so we spent the next hour talking about this, and he was very receptive to it, and he had lots of good questions. And so his question was, well, isn't that cheating? And I said, well, only if the medium is good, only if they do what they say they can do. If they're just making things up, then it's no different. So again, it's not cheating, it's just optimizing the process. So I'm just going to walk through, this is a typical way we do a reading at the Windbridge Institute. So we start with a medium who's been blinded to all information about the sitter and the discarnate, and the medium and I set up a time on the phone, and I am also blind to all information about the sitter and the discarnate. And all the medium and I have is a first name. So I call up Dave, and I say, the discarnate's name is Susie. And Dave does a reading for Susie. And during the reading, I ask specific questions. I ask about what did Susie look like in her physical life, describe her personality, how did she spend her time, what were her hobbies, and what was her cause of death. And then at the end, we ask what we call the reverse question, which is, does Susie have any comments, questions, or requests for the sitter? We feel like we make the discarnate jump through our hoops. We should let them say what they came there to say. So then a different day, we do a second reading for a gender match discarnate. Again, we don't have any information but the first name. And then those readings which have been recorded are transcribed and formatted into 2 item lists. So during that formatting process, I remove all reference to the name and turn the reading into numbered item lists so that each specific piece of information gets its own item number. And it's separate from other things. So you don't have to, she was tall and had red hair. How do you do that? So it's she was tall, she had red hair. You can score those independently because one might be right and one might be wrong. And I remove any ifs. Mediums rarely say, this is what it is. And so I change it to say, this is what it is. So if a medium says, I think that maybe she had red hair, I'm sort of seeing red hair, but I'm not entirely sure, I say, she had red hair. Because it's hard to score. I don't know, but I think maybe. So I turn them into very scientist declarative statements. So that was reading, pairing, and formatting. And now we'll do scoring. So when the sitter scores a reading, they score each item by answering this question. How well does the piece of information fit? So, and it's a 6-point scale. So you can say obvious fit, fit after interpretation, so fit requiring minimal interpretation or more than minimal interpretation. Other fit, which is it doesn't fit the person that we named, but it means something to me. It fits somebody else. It wasn't my dad, but I think it was my mom. No fit, that's wrong, and then I don't know. And when we count up the hits, we count obvious fits plus fits requiring minimal interpretation, and then we divide that by the total items minus the I don't knows. So we don't penalize the medium for the sitter not knowing the information. And we don't have a bar that, if a medium gets this many % of hits, they're good. We just compare the score, the % of hits that the sitters during an experiment gave their own reading, and we compare that to the scores that the sitter gave the other reading. So when I'll get into that in just a second. That's a little confusing. Let me come back to that. We've done a Susie reading and a Cheryl reading, and I've turned it into item list A and B, so it doesn't say Susie or Cheryl anywhere on the reading. And then these two lists are sent to both of the sitters. So, for example, it might be like Susie's husband and Cheryl's daughter. Susie's husband scores the Susie reading and the Cheryl reading, and Cheryl's daughter scores the Susie reading and the Cheryl reading, but they don't know which is which. And so when we look at the data, we just compare what people gave their own reading to what people gave the other person's reading. So this is that they would score each item, give each reading a score from 0 to 6, and then pick which reading that was theirs. And this is a quintuple blind procedure. So there's 5 levels of blinding, which I'll talk about. So the medium is blinded to information about the sitter or the discarnate. The sitters are blinded to which reading is theirs during scoring. The experimenter that consents the sitters and trains them how to do the scoring at the beginning of the study is blind to which medium's going to read which people, and the sitter doesn't have any contact with that experimenter once scoring begins. The experimenter who interacts with the medium on the phone is blind to information about the discarnate and the sitter. And then the experimenter that interacts with the sitters during scoring is blind to which mediums did which readings and which, that A goes with Susie and B goes with Cheryl. So there's 5 levels of blinding there. When I was still at the university, I published this study where we did that. We did that experiment. And this was back in the old days when there was just me. Now we have 2 people, so we can have 5 levels of blinding because now we have 3 experimenters. But it was just me, and so I sort of had to blind myself. I did have a research assistant that was shuffling things and sending me names and whatnot. So this was triple blind, but same idea. So what we found was, so this is the global scores, the scores that people gave the whole reading from 0 to 6, and so this is the scores that people on average gave their own reading, again, not knowing which was which, and the score that they gave the other person's reading. So it's 3.5 and about 2, and it's statistically significant, that difference. So people were able to differentiate their reading from the 2 under blinding conditions. And we did this study at the university before any sort of certification or screening process was developed. So these were mediums that just had been there in the lab when I got there. And so this is point by point it's by medium, and it's arranged by value difference. So like these 3 mediums did real well. Their scores that people gave the readings that belonged to them were 5 and above, and the scores that they gave the readings that weren't theirs were 2 and below. So that means that the people's own readings are really specific, and that the other readings, and that both readings were so specific that the other one didn't make any sense. And then there were a couple here in the middle, and then there were 3 who the people couldn't tell the readings apart at all. So I'm happy to say a couple of these mediums came with me when I went to Windbridge, and it was not these 3. I'll just say that.